Hey everybody, this is Bo Sanders and I am back. Yesterday's visit by the seminary students was fantastic and we did the Church 2.0 presentation, but it actually brought up a number of issues that I did not cover in the video for Church 2.0, and I thought that we would take a couple minutes to go through the 5 issues that were raised that I think kind of inform behind the scenes the thinking of Church 2.0 or some of its applications. So issue 1, I actually get from Peter Rollins. He introduced me to this idea from Lacan of the experience of absence and the absence of experience. It basically works like this. If you're at a coffee shop, and I'm there too, and you're at one table and I'm at another table, you and I are in the same place at the same time doing the same thing. But here's the difference. You are expecting your friend who hasn't shown up yet and hasn't texted. I don't know you're expecting anybody. So you are experiencing your friend's absence, and I'm having an absence of that experience. So that's just an anecdote. But if that little snapshot says that 2 people in the same place doing the same thing at the same time can have 2 entirely different experiences, how much more when you come into a church service like this, and maybe you have 100 people, you're having so many different experiences. You can all be in the same place doing the same thing at the same time, and yet you can hear the same sermon or sing the same song, but there's 100 different things happening in the room. Why not just embrace it? The powerful thing about Church 2.0 is that we don't presume that just because everybody hears the same 30-minute sermon with one person talking out of their experience, that everyone's going to get the same thing out of it. It frees us up to embrace the reality of the experience of absence and the absence of experience, so that if we sing a song, and say it was sung at your mother's funeral, you're having a very different experience with that song than if you didn't grow up in church, have never heard the song, and are thinking, this is a strange song. Why are we singing this? Oh, there's 6 verses. Why do we sing all 6 verses? 2 people, same place, same thing, same time. 2 totally different experiences. Just embrace it. The second issue is this weird idea that Church 1.0, it doesn't really matter at a normal church service who attends, let's be honest. It only matters that people attend. It doesn't matter who's there, because they're just spectators at a spectacle. But in Church 2.0, it really matters who's in the room, because they bring their story and their insight and their unique perspective and their narrative to the table. And you cannot hear their story if they're not in the room. So who comes matters a lot. At regular church, let's be honest, it doesn't matter who comes, just that people come. Issue number 3. In almost anything that you can study, there is a statistical bell curve that you can expect, whether it's height of humans or anything at all. So it's notable when something doesn't follow that pattern. In church attendance, they're saying in studies that most people attend a church that's smaller than 200 people in weekly attendance or over 1,200, and that there is a statistical trough. This is fascinating because it turns out this revolves around something called an economy of scale, that in a consumer culture, people will accept certain things if the church is small, under 200, that you can't pay for staff at every level, so there aren't going to be certain things, or certain things are going to be done by volunteers. Or at a church over 1,200, that you can have a minister or your part-time minister, a paid professional at every level, so that every member of your family has a ministry that is tailored to them. So you have a children's minister, a youth pastor, a worship pastor, visitation maybe by an executive or assistant pastor. You have a senior pastor, right? In every level, everyone is getting what they need. And you have a director of women's ministry and a men's ministry, and everybody gets what they want. It's like a mall, right? This is in high consumerism. This is everybody gets what they need, and they pay for it, right? And 1,200 people in an economy of scale. But here's the downside. In that same way, giving rates have changed vastly generationally, and people under 50 give at a much lower rate than people that generation over 50. So it changes the way that you have to staff or recruit or train or empower volunteers. So at smaller churches like this, it actually works because people's expectations are different. They know that not everything is going to be done for every age group or every demographic. I actually think that 2.0, one of the reasons I'm so confident that it's the future of the church, is because it can be done in rural settings, in urban settings, and in suburban settings of churches that don't have a lot of weekly attendance, small churches. It's a model for the future that doesn't require every demographic and every age group to have a ministry specifically tailored to them. When you break up into conversation groups, you can have your youth in one group, you can have your young people, or you can do multi-gen, you can do whatever you want. And when people come, because they get to contribute and their voice really matters, they know that they get to say something, bring their perspective. And so people of different gender, race, sexuality, religious background come because they actually get to participate and contribute to the meal that nourishes us all in that conversation. It's a very different model of church. I keep saying it's not a shtick, it's not a gimmick to get more people to come to church. In fact, I actually think less people will come to church, which isn't the point at all, but that's for a different time. Issue number 4. Is to learn to love the questions. One of the things I learned in LA, and it continues to hear, is that people say that they're bored at church and so they're looking for something different. But it turns out what they're really looking for sometimes is a slightly hipper version of what they have or are used to, or a slightly more progressive version of what they have or are used to. Because one of the funny stories is we have people who will come, and this happened a lot in LA. People will come for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they'll come up and they'll say, I really love it. I've never been in a place where it's safe to ask dangerous questions or, question my faith or, poke at things in the scriptures, question the Bible, whatever. It's really liberating. It's really freeing, and I love it. But when do you give the answers? And I'd say, oh, no. We're going to live into the questions. We love the questions. We want to make sure we're even asking the right questions before anybody pretends to give the answers. And it turns out people really like it when their pastor has the right answers. And questions can be fun short term, but eventually they see spiritual leadership as providing the answers. So issue number 4 is you have to learn to love the questions, because it might be all we have for the short term. Lastly, issue number 5. My friend Tad DeLay wrote a book called The Cynic and the Fool. I actually had Tad as my conversation partner in LA. He came and presented some of these ideas. And though it's a much bigger concept, the aspect of it that I have embraced and really appropriated for my work here in this Church 2.0 model is we live in a very cynical culture. People are actually practiced at being critical and cynical. You can see it on Facebook, everywhere, right? That we just live in a culture of criticism. People are very cynical. So it turns out in a conversation space like this, somebody has to be the fool. And I figured out that it has to be the pastor. And I figured this out in the worst way, which is the pastor, I've learned from experience, cannot be the most cynical person in the room. And that's tough because as ministers, it can be very freeing and very intoxicating to be in a space where you get to tell the truth about what you learned in seminary or Bible college or the books that you've read, and it can be really empowering. But you have to understand that the worst thing that can happen, and I only learned this from experience, there's no way I could have predicted this was coming, is that what people do not want to do is if they're looking for a new church and they leave their charismatic, evangelical, conservative church, right, 1.0 style, and they come to a conversational community like this, the last thing they want to do is have to stick up for the faith that they no longer believe in, right, whether it's their childhood faith or whatever it is that they're trying to move away from. And then they have to end up defending that faith that they no longer believe in against their spiritual leader. That's a recipe for disaster. So when I left LA and I moved up to become a professor, I would visit different churches every Sunday. And every week when I would drive home from church, I would say to myself, if I ever get to be back in ministry, if I ever get to be a pastor again, I'm going to be a fool for Jesus. I'm going to be this church 2.0 thing. I am going to believe it all the way down. Because here's how it works. I present, and I have to get myself into a place where I am saying what I truly believe. This isn't a thing where it's calculated. You tell the truth. You say what you really believe. But just understand what's about to happen. People are very comfortable. They're practiced at sitting through a church service. And then as they drive home and they go to Applebee's or the drive-thru, they'll say to the person in their car, you know, Pastor seems pretty sure about this or pretty confident, but I'm not so sure. That's something that's very comfortable. And so you have to let your people be cynical, but somebody's got to be the fool. And I have volunteered. I will be a fool for this. I will go down with this ship. That faith in Christ and empowering the church, for me, in Church 2.0 in conversation, I have put all my eggs in this basket. I will go down with this ship. I am betting my future and my ministry that this is a more integrity-filled way to be and do church. All right, so those are the updates, the things that came out yesterday. Let me know if you have anything you want me to address or follow up on. Thank you so much for sharing and for commenting. It has been a wonderful conversation starter.